The relative warmth of the Cretaceous brought with it tropical jungles, steamy volcanic wastelands, and dusty plains, and dinosaurs conquered them all. But there were cold ecosystems too, and while modern reptiles avoid these at all costs, dinosaurs have become well adapted to almost everything in the 170 million years up to the late Cretaceous. Around this time, there was a group of Ceratopsians who didn't follow the rules at all. Not only did they reject the very horns that their names imply, but they did what no other modern reptiles dare: conquered the snow. In this video, we're looking at a remarkable animal, perhaps even an extremophile, that threw out tradition and made its own legacy in the frosty north 75 million years before bison existed. And we'll finish up with a hint at what could have possibly killed off such a force of nature. And spoiler, it wasn't the asteroid. So let's start with the horniest beasts around at the time. Ceratopsians were some of the most successful herbivorous dinosaurs of the late Cretaceous. These were true tanks, and we know from healed wounds that they likely battled it out with T-Rexes as part of their daily routine. The name Ceratopsian means horned face, then it's unsurprising the family to which Triceratops belongs. Triceratops grew up to 12 tons, possibly even more, and was likely one of, if not the largest of the group, with Triceratops popping its horny face into shot as a candidate, but not yet backed up with enough fossil evidence. The smallest member known so far is the 70-kilogram Centrosaurus, and this one might sound familiar because it's one of the most studied dinosaurs, and one of the few for which the color of the animal is known, or at least given an educated guess. All of these animals are known for having beaks, but the family champions are generally the ones with the massive frills, so animals like Triceratops and Centrosaurus typically come to mind here. Both of these were large ceratopsians with very big frills and horny adornments, but interestingly, they are representatives of two distinct subfamilies. Triceratops was a member of the Chasmosaurinae, evolving in the western parts of North America in the second to last stage of the Cretaceous, and surviving right up until the end. They're commonly known as the long-frilled dinosaurs. Centrosaurus, on the other hand, diverged from the ancestral Chasmosaurians around 80 million years ago, and it was part of the other subfamily, Centrosaurinae. So they were quite distantly related to Triceratops by the time a resilient genus known as Pachyrhinosaurus shows up around 72 million years ago. This specialized Ceratopsian was also in the Centrosaurinae subfamily, and so, like all of the rest of the members, it wouldn't make it to the end of the Cretaceous. Both subfamilies occupied the westernmost part of North America during a time when you couldn't walk from west to east even if you wanted to. A long and shallow sea split the continent in twain, isolating Ceratopsians from the rest of the world. This would become important later on. Ceratopsians weren't just prevalent, they were diverse. Being restricted to such a relatively short time and space, it is remarkable how many different species emerged, and the family as a whole has some of the best fossil records of any dinosaur group. Their horn and frill morphology was clearly a mechanism of speciation and diversified rapidly, suggesting a huge drive of sexual selection in Ceratopsian evolution. One of the things that makes Pachyrhinosaurus unusual is that despite its name meaning thick nose horn, it is now thought to have had a conspicuous absence of horns on its face at all. Before we come to why, let's look at where and how it lived. For a solid chunk of the Cretaceous, the Canadian province of Alberta was almost entirely underwater. It wasn't a Canadian province back then, of course, as there were no Canadians, and they probably wouldn't have wanted it if there were. Alberta, like much of the continent, was warmer, wetter, and more plastered with enormous reptiles than it is today. Towards the end of the Cretaceous, the Rockies were being pushed up, the climate was cooling, and the western interior seaway was draining, leaving vast coastal plains, swamps, and a lot more temperate and subtropical forests to hide in. Fossils of Pachyrhinosaurus have been uncovered all across Canada, but especially in Alberta. Roughly 72 to 68 million years ago, this area was a diverse landscape of coastal plains, braided rivers, swamps, and forests. While not as warm as earlier Mesozoic environments, it was still relatively temperate compared to modern-day Alberta, which routinely drops to minus 35 degrees Celsius in the winter. And it was here that the so-called Pipestone Creek bonebed near Grand Prairie produced thousands of bones, mostly belonging to Pachyrhinosaurus lacustae. The site contains adults, juveniles, and hatchlings, evidence of large multi-generational herds. So Pachyrhinosaurus was likely very gregarious, if not very social. But this dinosaur moved even further north. Fossils of Pachyrhinosaurus peritorum were discovered in the Prince Creek Formation of northern Alaska, well above the Arctic Circle. Even in the warmer late Cretaceous, this region endured months of winter darkness and likely experienced significant snowfall. And so these finds indicate that there was a 4-ton, 8-meter reptilian herbivore, capable of enduring long nights, limited forage, and legitimately frigid temperatures. And this brings with it some interesting adaptations. It's not thought that Pachyrhinosaurus had feathers, so to keep warm, it likely would have had to store a blubbery layer of fat instead. Perhaps they huddled, like the emperor penguins in Antarctica, or perhaps they hibernated. The species exhibits distinct signs of slowed growth in seasonal bone rings, which are surely a sign of lowered metabolism during colder climates. They definitely didn't avoid the cold weather during winters, so they must have figured out some way to outlast it. But perhaps, like the modern-day bison, they used their enormous heads as snowplows, uncovering dormant plant matter under the winter drifts. And this brings us to the one thing that makes Pachyrhinosaurus such a rebellious animal. As a distinguished member of the horn-faced Ceratopsian, and the nose-horn genus at that, Pachyrhinosaurus was distinctly not horny. The cold can of course have that effect, for sure, but he was a genus that spanned all the way south into the subtropics as well, and had apparently replaced the characteristic horn of the family for a hardened boss on the front of its face. There are a lot of ideas as to why this was useful, but it's most likely to have been a way for members of the same species to engage in combat without killing one another. It certainly could have come handy for moving aside snow, and this might explain how Pachyrhinosaurus could be found so far north. But the main purpose of this outstanding knob would likely have been more sexual. Nobody wins if both fighting males mortally wound one another when competing over females, so in cases of high sexual selection, competition is often more abstract. It might be a dance or a song or a configuration of feathers, but the idea is that the less bloodshed the better, and if competitors can agree on who wins without expending too much energy, or worse, getting injured, everyone can get back to what they were doing without too much fuss. With larger animals, it's somewhat less abstract, but the same generally applies. Contests of strength see males wrestle or push one another, without the intent to cause serious harm. And so it may have been this incentive that led to the boss on the front of Pachyrhinosaurus, and perhaps that in turn led to a more capable animal in the snow, which allowed it to travel outside the reach of many of the dangerous predators and reduce the need for defensive spines in the first place. But something happened that led to the end of the line for Pachyrhinosaurus and its kin, and it came a little while before the asteroid that wiped out the Chasmosaurinae too. Before we go into that, it is time again to thank you guys for paying attention to the channel. It's a constant work in progress, so your comments are always useful, and please give this video a like if you've enjoyed it to help us keep it going. Now, the final stage of the Cretaceous, the Maastrichtian, was the scene of some very significant changes, especially in Laramida, where the Ceratopsians were. The western interior COA was dropping fast, and combined with the rising of the Rockies, it sent the region into a state of flux. Seasons probably increased in severity, with summers and winters becoming more pronounced. Vegetation changed, and landscapes would have shifted significantly in response to the new temperatures and water levels. The diversity of the Ceratopsians that made them so special came from an abundance of resources that each species had figured out how to exploit in their own way. This style of niche partitioning allows animals to avoid competition and over time creates unique and highly specialized animals. Meanwhile, there would also be a few generalists taking advantage of the restrictions on the specialists to pick and choose how and what to eat. But as is always the way, these generalists prevailed over the inflexible specialists. Ultimately, Precisely what may have resulted in the extinction of the hornless nosehorn isn't yet known, but there are many suggestions along those lines. It's been suggested that Pachyrhinosaurians as a whole specialized in tougher food, which may have been harder to come by as their ecosystems gave way to more angiosperms in the changing habitats. Or perhaps the sexual displays that led to the reduced nose weaponry in the first place also left it more vulnerable to a new generation of predators. The great diversity of Ceratopsians led to a lot of experiments. Some worked and some didn't. Whatever the reality around the demise of Pachyrhinosaurus, it looks like, despite all its incredible adaptations, this unusual dinosaur vanished just before the Cretaceous asteroid had time to finish them off, around 70 million years ago. Extreme shifts in climate always result in a process of great reshuffling of biota. And one such event just like this gave rise to the dinosaurs in the first place, and we have a whole video on that, so check that one out next. Meanwhile, that's all for this one. Thanks again, and see you next time.